Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, paragraph 13. While the initial appearance of the new world is, to begin with, only the whole veiled in its simplicity, or the general foundation of the whole, the wealth of previous existence is still present to consciousness in memory. Consciousness misses in the newly emerging shape its former range and specificity of content, and even more the articulation of form, whereby distinctions are securely defined and stand arrayed in their fixed relations. Without such articulation, science lacks universal intelligibility and gives the appearance of being the esoteric possession of a few individuals. An esoteric possession, since it is as yet present only in its notion or in its inwardness. Of a few individuals, since its undiffused manifestation makes its existence something singular. Only what is completely determined is at once exoteric, comprehensible, and capable of being learned and appropriated by all. The intelligible form of science is the way open and equally accessible to everyone, and consciousness, as it approaches science, justly demands that it be able to attain to rational knowledge by way of the ordinary understanding. For the understanding is thought, the pure I as such, and what is intelligible is what is already familiar and common to science and the unscientific consciousness alike, the latter through its having afforded direct access to the former. Okay. So we're getting here into, I think, actually a very interesting problem, the problem of Hegel's difficulty and inaccessibility. And he seems, in some ways, to be making a kind of self-commentary, I think, in this paragraph. He's talking about the risk that science is something elitist, that knowledge becomes something that if we characterize insight as requiring the labyrinthine mediations of reason, then that's going to render it available to very, very few people, people that have the time and the intellectual stamina and the will to bother reading, a book like The Phenomenology of Spirit, or whatever book we think it is that would get us closer to that kind of insight, which makes that intuitionism that he's been eschewing so far look kind of attractive. It doesn't place that sort of burden upon us, and it seems kind of egalitarian. If the truth is something immediately available, that the truth is something that you don't have to reason your way toward, then it also isn't contingent upon any sort of personal or private or mental characteristics. You aren't closer to it by virtue of a high IQ or tremendous rhetorical cleverness or anything like that. The dumb guy is just as capable of touching science or insight. If we acknowledge insight to be something experiential, the dumb guy is just as close to it as the genius. That's kind of that seems like, on the one hand, kind of an attractively democratic view of truth, but it's obviously one that Hegel can't endorse. But what he does here, and I think we should recall back in his first paragraph, his discussion of the science of anatomy, which he characterized as a science that's still in a state of such incompleteness that it's a little bit problematic to refer to it as a science. It's not clear even that the true object of the science of anatomy has come into view. We still kind of need more information before we can describe it as complete. And likewise, we can think of, if we think of an individual science as developing gradually and piecemeal like that, not all at once, then we also have to think of scientific insight as being historical, as sort of having a historically specific and geographically specific origin, right? An individual scientist or thinker has to formulate the new theory. Even if they do so on the basis of centuries worth of development. There is something that, remember that image of the sunburst that he gives us, the flash of insight that transforms the intellectual landscape. But it doesn't do so all at once. It kind of has to move across space and time. It doesn't reach everybody immediately. It first circulates through the scientific community. And then when it becomes, more or less the common sense of the scientists, it begins to disseminate throughout the popular imagination, so that we get, whereas, say, in the 1850s, Darwin's theory of species variation by natural selection was something that was available to a tiny little community of people that were interested in naturalism. Today, it's more, it's something that everybody talks about. You encountered it in public school biology class. It's not esoteric knowledge at all. So Hegel seems to have really a vision that even the most difficult, the weirdest, the points of scientific knowledge that require the most torturous and labyrinthine processes of historic mediation, nonetheless, in the end, they do become universally available. And that's what finally gives them legitimacy. If they can't do that, if they can't render themselves available to the ordinary understanding, then they are as yet incomplete sciences. They don't yet quite deserve the name of science. Now, I'm not exactly sure how far to take that. On the one hand, he's trying to turn what looks like a radical elitism into a radical anti-elitism by saying that in the end, everything that counts as true must be acknowledgeable by all. But what I think of here, more than anything, is a remark that was made by Zizek in an interview. And I think, if I remember right, it was for one of those British high IQ panel shows. And I think that it was the novelist Will Self that was interviewing him. It wasn't really a great interview. I thought Will Self came off as rather a buffoon, kind of unfamiliar with any of Zizek's work and really kind of unable to deal with it on the spot. And after he kind of more or less ran out of supposedly clever things to say, he resorted to the kind of cliched faux democratic objection. Who's going to be able to read this stuff, Zizek? Your latest book, Zizek, is filled with quotations and terminology derived from Hegel and Lacan and Marx and object-oriented ontology and all sorts of weird stuff that's just going to, obviously it's going to be way over, it flew over my head, right, Will Self. So it's going to be way over the head of your ordinary man in the street. So who is all of this for? It is kind of his question. It kind of reminded me of the old, lazy high school student question. When are we ever going to have to use this? But Zizek's comeback, I thought, was really interesting. He said, I know taxi drivers in Pakistan who read Hegel. But, he said, the taxi drivers in Pakistan that I know can tell you the difference between the first edition of Hegel's Wissenschaft der Logik and the second edition of Hegel's Wissenschaft der Logik, which I thought was that there's, if somebody claims that it's simply that what you're saying is simply too difficult, the only way really to rebut that is I think the way Zizek did it, by slyly saying it's only too difficult for you, buddy, and that's, I think, in some ways what Hegel is kind of saying in this paragraph, in other words, he's making a wager. If my philosophy is on the right track, that its justification will be that eventually it becomes intelligible to the taxi driver in Pakistan.